All right, so we're going to get started. We're a few minutes late already. Sorry to the people on the Zoom. So don't worry, you guys haven't missed anything. We were muted, but that's because there was a lot of noise around here, but now we're ready to go. So thank you all for coming this morning. And we're going to get started. So we asked for people to submit questions in advance, as we had done with the other two Q&As, and this time we got a lot of questions. So we have a lot of questions locked and loaded here, ready to go. So after I'm done with all the questions that were submitted in advance, I'm going to open up the floor to any questions from the audience here. And when the audience people do their questions, if you could just repeat the question for the benefit of the people on the Zoom. Yes, sir. Yes, so we should probably introduce and welcome Rabbi and Rabbi Ari Erin Galandauer to our Q&A this week. Okay. And nearly all of these questions were submitted anonymously, so I'm just going to leave them all as anonymous. Okay. So first question is for Rabbi Galandauer. What is your vision for the future of the shul?
I would answer that question by saying it's probably very similar to the vision that everyone else has, which is you want to have a vibrant, warm, opening, welcoming community that supports each other, continues in the legacy of what the shul has built over the many, many years, and is able to successfully carry that forward into the future.
Okay. Next question. For the rabbi as well. You've been the Rav for 10 months and there are no new people attending davening. What do you plan on doing differently to attract new young members?
I would suggest first and foremost that the questioner come to shul.
Well, let's assume that person did come to shul.
So what am I planning on doing to attract new people to come to shul? That's the question.
What are you going to do differently to attract new young members?
So I think this really addresses a much larger issue, which is what is the shul ready and prepared to do together to be able to attract new members? You know, one of the things I have to say about this entire weekend, when it comes to the speaking, the drushas, the onegs, and all these different things, that's easy stuff, at least for me. But one of the most difficult parts is really this morning's Q&A. And the reason why it's most difficult is because, you know, perhaps maybe, 15 years ago or so, where you'd come in and just try to sell yourself and just tell the people whatever they want to hear in order to be able to get the position that you so badly want. Experience in life has taught me that honesty is really the most important thing that you really need to have. And you have to have openness and clarity. And there has to be really a realization of what the situation is and where we want to go with it. It's very easy to ask a question to say, hey, you, what are you going to do to bring people in? What are you going to do in situation X or in situation Y? That's the easy question to ask. The harder question is to say, what are we together as a shul community, looking at the community that we're in, what are we prepared to do in order to move the shul forward into the next phase of its existence? And that is a much more difficult question, and that requires a lot of reflection, and it also requires a lot of honesty. You all have been here longer than me, say maybe Austin, and you know the neighborhood a lot better, and you know the changes that have happened over time, and you know where things are holding up, much more than I do. So you know the uphill struggle, so to speak, that the shul faces within the community. And this is not because of anything negative about the shul, absolutely not. The shul has been, the base of this community for more than half a century. But one of the blessings of success, if you will, is that you never know where it's going to take you. And the reality is the community has changed around the shul. And in many ways, it is a blessing. So many communities struggle with the fact that people have left and nobody's coming by, it's dwindling, and there is no future for the community as a whole. NMB is blessed with the opposite. People are coming here, they're flocking here. However, it's changed, it's a new dynamic. And the question is, what can we all do to be able to attract and bring in that dynamic? And to look at any one particular piece or one individual and say, what is it that you specifically are going to do that's somehow going to magically make everything suddenly turn? It's a nice question. And if somebody feels that it's as simple as that, kol hakavod to them, and I wish them the best of luck. But I'm here to be honest with you all. And we all know that it's a challenge. It's one that can be met, but it's a question of what are we prepared to do to make this shul the place that the new NMB that continues to emerge will find a home. And that is not an easy answer. That is not so simple. It sounds sometimes simple, but we have still a diverse community, Baruch Hashem. We have people who are here, they have built the shul, they have expectations, and they want to see it continued. But on the other hand, you have a whole new world that's come out there and that continues to come in that we have to take into consideration. You know, someone mentioned to me that we all have the same goal. And what is that? That we want to see more people in shul. We want to have more people here. And on a superficial level, that's absolutely true. We all have that goal. We all want to see more people in the shul. We do. But then I was thinking to myself, last time I was driving by Kal Hasidim, and I noticed they made an extension. And I said, well, that's interesting. Why didn't we here at Young Israel simply go to them and say, you know what, instead of renovating and extending over there, why don't you just come over here? And boom, you have a lot more people in your shul. Wow. When we talk about having more people, do we really mean that at any cost? Do we really mean that no matter what? So it's a tough question in this community, because this community has changed and continues to change. And I know what I'm willing to do. I know the things that I'm willing to do to try and be as attractive as possible to people within the community. I know what it means to go ahead and build relationships, or at least to try to. I know what it means to be able to run different things, whether it be different programs. But I also know that the things that are going to bring people into a shul are not limited to program X or individual Y. There's so much more that comes with it. And so I hope I've answered the question, but I invite as part of the question, whoever asked it, and for all those who are thinking the same thing, because we all should be. But it's not a question that should be limited, you know, where is our savior? You know, we wait for the Mashiach every day, he'll solve all our problems. And God willing, that'll come real soon. But when it comes to a community, when it comes to a shul, the question is broader than that. If we're waiting for a Messiah who's going to come and poof, it's all going to change overnight, I think the questioner is right. I have been here for 10 months. There's lots going on these past 10 months, no question about it. But where is the individual in the sense of what can we all do in terms of making the shul a place where people feel comfortable and want to be a part of it?
Okay. Before I go on to the next few questions, I forgot to make the announcement. Dr. Heller sends his regrets that he wasn't able to make it this morning. He's on his way up to Memphis for the graduation of his son, so he wasn't able to make it this morning. Let's see, next question here for Rabbi Galandauer as well. What is your availability given that you are a full-time teacher at the Hebrew Academy? Will you be able to attend daily morning and evening minyanim?
Okay, so this is another very important issue that people have to be aware of. So from the very beginning, when a search committee was formed to find a new rabbi, etc., so there were certain individuals who came in and said, hey, why don't you throw your hat and why don't you apply for the job? And there were several reasons that I gave why I did not do that. And one of them, of course, is that, you know, we moved down here for a specific reason, which was we needed a larger community for my family. Even when in my previous position, I was a rabbi of a shul in Ottawa, but I was also teaching. And teaching is something that it's a passion, certainly not for the big bucks. And it's something that's always been important to me. And that really is what a rabbi is at the end of the day, whether it's adult education, younger education. Education is really, my main focus and my main goal. So we came down here, we got the position at the Hebrew Academy. I very much like that position. I very much like that community and whatnot. And so one of the most important things that initially prevented me from even thinking about it was, well, if the shul is looking for a full-time rabbi and has the needs that it feels it has and what it needs, so there's really nothing to talk about because, I can't offer that. And then over time, certain things change, I guess, with at least some members of the board and whatnot, or, and apparently not just with me, but with other candidates as well that I looked at, that often this idea of, not being able to do whatever other things that they're also involved with, became an issue. And so I was eventually informed by Dr. Jackie White, so I should go with him, that you wouldn't necessarily have to give up your job at Hebrew Academy, that something could be worked out. I said, if that's the case, then there may be something to talk about over here. And that remains true. And that remains true on two levels. First of all, on the practical level, we are Canadian, I apologize. We are Canadian, and we came down here on what's known as a clergy visa. And while a visa that we're on can certainly be added to, but Hebrew Academy in the meantime are our main sponsors. They are the ones who sponsor us to be here. And so we are legally obligated to that. You can add on more institutions or positions to the visa if you want to. That's perfectly fine and legal. It just has to be done, but it's no issue. But it certainly does not remove, at least in the interim, that initial commitment that is made under that visa. So that's point number one. Personally, the way I would ideally envision things is that depending on how things would move forward and whatnot, God willing, visas only take you so long and last so long. You get, I think, about 5 years or so. And then you either go for a green card or Homeland Security comes and escorts you, supposedly. And at some point when you have to go for a green card, and when you do that, so that opens up a whole array of different options because now you're no longer tied to any one institution. You're not sponsored here. You can work and do whatever you please. At which point there would be a reconsideration on my part in terms of where I want to shift around more of my time. So that is in the general sense in terms of the now and future. But the practicality for the now, until I would go for a green card or whatnot, until the shul is added to the visa, I am an employee of the Hebrew Academy, and therefore I have the commitments that I have over there. And that is something that, I've again, open and honest, I've mentioned to the board. They know fully well exactly what the circumstance of that is, and that position, is going to continue. And therefore it has to be balanced. And there has to be like a meeting of the mind, so to speak, between what the shul needs and what I'm able to do. And hopefully that meeting of the mind, my impression from the board is that it can be reached. Seems like it's in the right direction. And so that aspect, on both sides, there'll have to be an understanding of that balance, because there is the commitments that have been made already that still exist with the Hebrew Academy. On the other hand, I, very much interested and dedicated to doing what I can for the shul. And long before I became the rabbi here, somebody else was mentioning to me the other night that, the biggest reason that I'm sitting here is because, I'm in the community for 3 years. I didn't walk in here yesterday. After living here for, I think it was the second Shabbos we were here, the first one was a story to itself. I ended up at Biala for one reason. A, I was living right next door to them. And B, even though we heard about the famous thunderstorms that could hit in this area, rain is rain. Rain is not rain. It's not rain. And so living right next door, that's how we ended up. But the next Shabbos, there's a young Israel in town. I was a young Israel rabbi. I grew up in young Israel. I went to the young Israel. And I remember that Shabbos they asked me to daven. And then the next week we were invited somewhere. So we went to another shul. And then when I came back here the week after or something, I won't say who said this, but they commented and said, we didn't think we'd see you again. And I'm like, why not? why didn't you see me again? And I said, don't explain. But So the bottom line is there definitely going to be a balance that has to be understood from both sides between the position of Hebrew Academy and what we can do here for the shul? Absolutely. But I do believe that if the shul wants that, there could be a meeting of the minds to work that out, certainly in the short term, meaning over the next year or so. And then once if you go for a green card, then that opens up a whole different amount of options.
You have to be careful. Don't forget our security director is also a customs and border agent. So
I was hoping that would help.
This is a very short meeting to get out.
Okay.
Brian,
Yes.
our website she's having problems with the password.
Sure. The password is Q as in Quincy, A as in Apple, 66.
All lowercase,
All uppercase.
uppercase?
Yes, sir.
No.
Okay, back to questions. Let's see, what was I up to? I was up to this one, that one, next one. Rebbitzin, this one's for you. What do you envision as your role as Rebbitzin?
My role is Rebbitzin. I'm going to be open and honest, like my husband. From the first day we got married, for that, my job was going to be my family. My family comes first and foremost. Baruch Hashem, I've been blessed with a very large family with small ones. Saying that, my role as Rebbitzin is to back my husband. Where my husband needs help, that's where I'll be. And that, in short, is how I envision my role. I'm happy to have an open house. I always have, I always will, regardless of whatever happens. And I'm happy to talk to people. I'm happy to be out there, but
Okay. Let's see, next question. Rabbi. So now I'm getting into multiple people asking questions. So some of them may be slightly repetitive, and if so, you could just refer to your previous answer, but I want to ask the question anyway. What changed your mind, given that you said no a few times when asked if you wanted to be the synagogue rabbi?
Well, I can't say nothing because I am sitting up here. What changed my mind? So as I mentioned before, the main things that have changed my mind, number one, is the job description initially, as I saw it from the RCA and was informed about it, was a full-time position over here for the shul, and that obviously, it's not going to happen. So that was one issue, and that issue appears to have, as I mentioned before, appears to have changed to some degree. There's a willingness to figure something else out. So that's one aspect. Another aspect, however, is the following. So now I'm going to speak for a moment, not as a rabbi, but I'm going to speak as actually a member, because I also am a member of the shul, and I have been more or less since I've been here. And I'm a member, like so many others, meaning that, I'm in this shul mainly, but I've also been around and whatnot. And one of the things that I noticed, over time, and it's not a lot of time, but it really doesn't take that long to figure things out over the past couple of years, is that, this shul is in an interesting situation because the neighborhood has changed around it, and it's a really big question of how it's going to approach that future. What is it? What is the plan over here? And one of the things from the very beginning, when I was listening to the job description and hearing people talk about it and whatever, I would ask a simple question, which is, what is the future vision of the shul? Where do they see themselves in 10, 15 years from now? And I'll be honest with you, I'm still waiting for a good answer. And I'll be honest, I think you're all waiting for a good answer to that question, because that's a tough question. And so when people say, well, why don't you throw your hat in the ring? I said, it's because I know too much. In other words, I understand the situation here. I know what's going on. I'm not sure what the plan is moving forward. And that, you should know, hasn't changed all that much. It's changed a little bit, but not all that much. And it's simply because you had the dynamics that we have. And what changes is that I think that there's a willingness and an openness to start thinking about that in a meaningful way that may produce the changes that we need to make to have a role in the future in this community. But that is something that still remains to be seen, because there are going to be a lot of ideas thrown out there about what we can do. And some of them will sound great to some people and will sound, are you kidding me, to others? And that is a question that as a shul community, we're going to have to grapple with. And I think the shul is at a point that they recognize that they have to grapple with it, and it's better to do that now than to wait a few more years. But that is something that has to be dealt with. And so that was part of my hesitancy in the beginning, especially when there was zero clarity on this question, at least in my mind. And that still remains something that, it's not fully explored and developed. What is going to be the future role that this shul plays in the community? And it's a conversation that has to be had. It will be had either, by hook or by crook, whether we do it voluntarily because we understand what we need to do for the future, or whether it's forced upon us at some point in time when we realize, hey, something has to give. And so my hope at this point is to try to be a part of that solution at this stage of the game. And so those are the things that have convinced me to heed the call, which is also the last point that I want to make. I'm really appreciative and thankful of all the harassment that has been going on, whether it be in the board, to the board members or whatnot, but the support that I've gotten from people, to throw my hat in the ring and that, we like you and we want you to be a part of the shul and remain and whatever. It's really, really very meaningful. And it really speaks more than anything, at the very least, to the hakaras hatov that people have. Because, again, as somebody else mentioned, maybe people realize or not, because of Rabbi Letterfield, I was volunteering for the shul in various capacities I can because of Rabbi Letterfield and because of the shul. And, some places will take that for granted and say, thank you very much, and Zatzmer Gesund. And the response over here was very different. And so I definitely appreciate that. And so when people say, well, what else made change your mind? Well, if you listen to some of the people, the way they have spoken up for me, not to at least have considered it would have been more dangerous. So I really thank people for that.
Okay. Again, this one's slightly repetitive, but I think it's a little bit more specific. So given your job at Hebrew Academy, what kind of flexibility will you have to fill the needs of our shul?
So the nice part about a school environment as general is that it is defined, right? So you have your hours that you're there. It's generally during the week. It doesn't have anything to do with weekends, by and large. Evenings are also pretty much open, late afternoons and evenings. So there is a certain amount of built-in flexibility in terms of that type of time. To get into any specific would really depend on, what are we referring to in terms of a specific program or a specific thing. So obviously, and I asked this question myself, I was like, somebody passes away and, they need to have a funeral done time X, and I'm in school. What do I do about that? That's a good question. So, there's a certain amount of flexibility that the school can show, and there's zero flexibility that a person can show when they pass, obviously. There's nothing you can do about that. But certainly in other areas, there has to be, again, that flexibility of what the time commitments are on one side and what we can do on the other. But there certainly is, in terms of a shul setting as a whole, there's a lot of opportunity and plenty of area that you have a meeting of the minds in the sense of, school is much more of a confined to the certain hours of the weekday, and, shul, again, depending on, what we're trying to accomplish and do, is far more, Shabbos, holidays, weekends, hosting, evening things, weekend things, and that type of nature. But certainly there will be, not that maybe, there will be some areas of conflict. Yes, there definitely will.
So as a follow-up to that question, I'll ask, so specifically wintertime, Mincha Marav is pretty early around here. Would you be able to attend Mincha Marav during the week?
Yes. Well, thank God Hebrew Academy has a light schedule, at least in the middle school still. We don't have the full yeshiva schedule yet. So generally, yeah, I think it's usually around 5 o'clock. Specifically, that's not an issue.
All righty. Again, repetitive, but you'll get it. So this actually is for both. What would you do to help our shul grow and increase our membership, especially with the potential members below 40?
For both of us?
Sure. That's
I'll give my spiel. So again, what are we going to do to help grow the shul? So the first thing that we're going to do, in all honesty, is we're going to be pushing everyone here. And that is, there are things that can be done in terms of this community. There's a lot of people moving in here. There's only so much room in any given shul. You know, this NMB, ironically enough, it was not built for a Jewish community, physically speaking. There's small houses, little space for a mega complex of a shul. So at a certain point, you know, no matter what success anybody else is having, there's going to be overflow. Young Israel can get its share. There's no question about that. It's figuring out, you know, what we're going to do in order to get that share. And there are ideas and programs that we can look to, whether it be for the younger element that tends to be more yeshivish, that's moving in, and the things that they're looking for, which is obviously going to contain, to one degree or another, a lot more, you know, learning programming and things of that nature that they like. And you still have, of course, you know, the constituency that we do have that wants Shabbos programming and various type of kids programming that has finally come up again. So there are things that can be done. But most important thing is that we have to challenge ourselves in terms of our comfort level of what are we prepared to bring in to allow for a space for others to be able to be comfortable within the walls of the Young Israel. You know, one of the things that doesn't surprise me, but it's just one of those facts of life, I guess. But you know, again, better than I, Young Israel was the shul, right? And then there was a breakaway. I think it's called Charity. And then another shul opens up. And then this happens and that happens. And before you know it, you know, you have what you have over here today. And besides for a space issue, let's assume for a second that the building could accommodate everything. We all know that even if that was the case, you wouldn't have everyone in one building. And the question is why? How does that come to pass? How does it come to pass that people feel that somehow they can't all share the same space and that there's not enough space for everybody within a facility? There are very smart, wise communities and shuls out there that seem to have figured it out to one degree or another. There's a famous one that's sitting in Boca. There's a very famous one that's in Toronto, Canada, called The Bite. You have in there a YU kollel, you have a Lakewood kollel, you have every minion under the sun, you have black hat, blue hat, green hat, no hat, whatever, and somehow they're in one facility. Now, yes, it's built in Thornhill, Ontario, where at the time there was nothing there, so they could have a massive institution, but it didn't start that way. It didn't start that way. It started small. But the difference is that somehow they managed to figure out that when people had a different need, we'll make a space for you. You don't have to go across town. We'll make a space for you here. We'll figure it out. We all know 50, 60 years ago, whenever it happened, that didn't happen here. That's never happened here. And we have to start figuring out how to make it happen. Because when you look at people, how are you going to attract the young members under 40? Well, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to ask them, hey, why don't you come here? And they're going to have a laundry list. And now the question is, are we going to look at that list and we're going to say, sorry, there's no space for you here? Or are we going to say, let's make a space. Let's bring them in. What's it going to cost? What does it mean to bring them in? I don't know. It's going to mean something. It's going to mean some changes. But are we prepared to make spaces for everyone? I'm prepared to make spaces. Are we prepared to make spaces for everyone that they can feel that this is their home? A person shouldn't have to go to the kollel to feel that they have a makom Torah. They should be able to feel that they have a makom Torah here. It doesn't mean you can't go to the kollel. Go visit them. But you should also have a makom Torah here. Everyone. And so that's really, you know, when we talk about, you know, attracting people is, you know, people want to be around the matzah. They want to be around something that's happening. And they want to be around something that's happening because they feel that they're a part of it, they're a part of something, and it meets their needs, whatever that may be. And that's the space that we have to create. And now I'll let my wife talk a little bit about another aspect which is extremely important, which is outreach in the sense of hospitality.
As I'm not a public speaker, so it may be short. As I mentioned before, we've always had an open house, right from the day one. We have had an open house. Our house has been open to people who have knocked on my door after the candles, to getting a call right before Shabbos, to weeks in advance, having to book weeks in advance. Our house is open for meals. Our house is open for people to come in and talk and schmooze. Our house is just an open house, and we intend on keeping it that way. You know, when we moved down here, it was really special to be welcomed so wholeheartedly by the community in general, but specifically at the Young Israel community. And it was just really nice, and I would love to be able to be part of doing the same and passing on the welcome that we got when we came down here.
10 kids will become a few hundred kids, right?
Yeah.
Amen.
I already have someone calling me Ma, so.
Yeah, but I think it's very important to realize that, at least for us, you know, when we got married and we lived in Montreal, so for the first year, you know, 2 years, you know, so we always had people over. When we moved to Eretz Yisrael, one of the first things in the program that I joined in Orla Gola was, you know, when you guys need to send boys for Shabbos, you know, put us on the list. We're there.
Same
You know.
seminaries.
Same with seminaries. When we moved out to Utah, I can proudly say I can think of one Shabbos where we were by ourselves, and that's really my wife's fault, because every week she would say, like usually on Tuesday or Wednesday, oh, maybe this week will be a quiet Shabbos. And as soon as you open your mouth, that's it. The calls start coming in. And it's great. You know, that's always been the way it is. And it's the way it is for us even here. You know, we don't need to be the rabbi and listen to those people. You know, we had a guy called us, my wife, on Friday last week. We were already having another couple at the house. And they called Friday afternoon and they said, you know, we're looking for a place for Shabbos in the area. And we called this one and that one. And then whoever they called last said, call the Galandauers. So you don't have to continue calling. I don't know. We like people, I guess.
Right. Nice question.
Why don't you get through all the written ones first, and then we'll open it to the floor. I'll skip that one because it's completely repetitive. Rebbitzin. I'll skip part of it, but what was your favorite part of being a shul Rebbitzin when you were in Ottawa?
I'm going to say hosting people. I enjoy having people. I enjoy getting to meet people one-on-one. I enjoy actually smaller crowds. So it was actually more special. An event was nice. Going to an event was really nice, but getting to meet people in my home and you know, getting to know them was probably my favorite part.
Okay. Rabbi, would you, specifically you, be willing to recite the prayer for Israel and the IDF like Rabbi Lerfield did?
Avinu, Avinu.
I guess that's a yes.
I didn't say yes. So to recite it like Rabbi Lerfield did, I mean, he had his own unique text and way of doing things, so absolutely.
Rabbi as well, would you be willing to have the shul recite Hallel on Yom Ha'atzmaut?
Would I be willing to have them recite on Yom Ha'atzmaut?
That's what the question says.
Okay, so I mean, that assumes the following, which is that the shul doesn't have a minute. I'm going to assume that that's not true. The shul wasn't developed yesterday, been open yesterday, and so obviously it has been hugging. And one of the things that I am very, very staunch supporter and loyalist of is that, you know, you don't mess around with shul's been hugging. And you know, in my interim stay over here, you know, one of the first things that I always ask people when they ask me certain things, I say, well, what's the shul minute? You know, what do you do? And oftentimes, you know, they don't remember whatever it might be, but shul and hagim are very, very important. Now, if you're asking me more on a personal level, meaning, you know, what do I feel about, you know, Hallel and Yom Ha'atzmaut? So I don't say Hallel and Yom Ha'atzmaut. I certainly, you know, halacha in terms of saying with bracha is certainly, you know, by most poskim quite problematic, and that's why a lot of places, which I didn't even realize, even at Hebrew Academy, which is a very Zionist school, they said Hallel, half a Hallel, so I'm not sure what that is, but you know, without a bracha. So, but I'm very respectful of minhagim. I'm very respectful of people, and you know, you have a derech, you have the poskim that you follow, and that's important to maintain and to have a space for. At the same time, the question could be flipped the other way, which is, you know, you want to attract people who are younger, and perhaps they might be of the persuasion that says, you know, you don't want to say Hallel on Yom Ha'atzmaut. And the question is there a space for that? And that's not a question for merely me to answer, but that's a shul community question.
Being here for 35 years, being over there for the son, it was total again. The first week, my father came to the show, and they asked him, we said, how young must go? My father answered that when he was a Rebbe, we were down in South Beach. They personally called their salvation. And they asked my salvation. He said, how young must go? The salvation said, hell no. He used that word. So there's a floor for him in the Rambam, there is a high of that. And the meaning of the show always was, if you want to say, how you must move, go to Charlottesville. But as far as when my father was here, he never, ever allowed how you must move and you must go on. And again, you guys can do what you want to do, but if you want to know what the meaning of the show has been for the last 35 years, my father was very, didn't say hollow, didn't say tough. My father was very, again, after speaking directly with the Salvation that was brought down to Florida, the Salvation himself, and his own minion in YU, or his own minion in Boston, did not say hollow and they must vote. So I always used to ask the people in the shoulder that were saying you hollow, who's your worker? Certainly not a Salvation. You're making it up yourself. So, and especially now, we're trying to attack the more quote unquote yeshivish crowd. I mean, that's like a death sentence. So if we want to bury our heads in the sand and say, oh, we're going to keep doing what we did, for the last 30 years because that's how we did it, then we might as well just pull up the show.
Just to clarify, this was a question of one person. It doesn't mean it's representative of everybody.
No, but I think, but one of the things that Moshe spoke to now, which is very important, and I really, I feel strongly about, which is the minhagim established in a shul. You have to be very careful with messing around. Period.
Okay. Next question, and I'll shorten this a bit for both. Are you both committed for the long haul? In other words, can we count on you with complete confidence that you will stay and not leave us to accept another calling for any reason?
I'm going to answer that the way Reb Tevye did in Fiddler on the Roof. Actually, it wasn't Tevye, it was the rabbi. I think it's Mottel at the end of the movie says when they're being thrown out of the village, says, Rabbi, wouldn't this be a great time for the Mashiach to come? And he says, yes, but we'll have to wait for someone else. So in our lives, we've moved around quite a bit, relatively speaking, Thomas. We lived in Montreal, we moved to Eretz Yisrael, we moved to Utah, we moved to Ottawa, we moved to here. Some of it is intentional, some of it not. God plans. God has his plans, we have our plans. Hopefully they meet up somewhere at some point. God's plans always, win out at the end of the day. But I think you're asking in terms of our intentions. So we moved down here for a reason. We wanted to be in a larger community. I didn't want to send my kids away for school. And then I come here and I find my kids send their kids away for school, which I don't understand at all. But it is what it is, but that's certainly not my intention. I'm sending your kid away for high school. What do you think I moved here for? I could stay where I was and send my kid away. So that's why we came to a community of this, that it's one that we can settle in. Okay? Is Eretz Yisrael and Aliyah in my mind, certainly in the back of it? Absolutely, it is. Baruch Hashem, we have kids, and that's one of the biggest obstacles we hear to Aliyah in Eretz Yisrael. It's not so simple. And you can't just go and sacrifice your children for, some of your ideals. And as you're well aware, we still have quite a number of young ones. So while that certainly remains in our minds, that is the only real competition at this point to Miami. So God willing, Mashiach comes and we all go there together. That's the best solution. Assuming we have to wait a little bit longer, I don't plan on moving to Anatevka or any other similar place, but we're in here. We're in here for the meantime until that Eretz Yisrael dream could be lived.
Okay. Next question. Why did you decide to leave a pulpit position in Ottawa and take a teaching position in Miami?
My kids.
Okay.
Plain and simple. the truth is there I was teaching also. It was like, I was in the shul and also teaching in the day school over there. But in our last year in Ottawa, we had to send our daughter to Beis Yaakov in Montreal. And Montreal is no more than 2 hours away, depending who's driving. It's not that far. She was able to come home practically every Shabbos, and it's ripped my heart every time she had to leave on Sunday. And as important as Rabbanah's community, I'm not doing that for my daughter. That's not.
Okay. Let's see, Rabbi, who would be the halachic authority that you would consult for difficult shul questions?
Always love that question. It's almost like a question that you have to ask, and then I always wonder, is like, do you have any suggestions? And very rarely does anybody have any suggestions. So it's a question on multiple levels, meaning there's who do I ask my questions to that affect nobody but myself and my family. And that's my Rebbe, of course, from Montreal, Rabbi Katz. That's my posek. Okay, but then there's the shul, and what do you do with shul questions? So, Baruch Hashem, I'm a member of the RCA, I'm a member of the Aguda, I'm a member of the Young Israel, National Council of Young Israel. So there's certainly no shortage of their leading poskim that to ask questions to and that are there to help guide in whatever way that they can. One of the really tremendous things that I appreciate from the National Council of Young Israel is they have every single week for branch Rabbanim, they have a Q&A with Rav Willett. Every single week, you send in your questions and you sit down, have a Zoom call, if you will, and usually about an hour or so, goes through everything. If anybody has any other questions, any follow-ups. And so one of the things that it has done over time is it has allowed me to, form a bit of a kesher. And so Rav Mordechai Willig is definitely one of the first individuals that pop into my head when it comes to shul-related matters, because he is mamish somebody who is literally on the scene, in the thick of it all, on multiple different levels, and has just tremendous experience across the board. And so that is definitely, one of the main individuals that I always look to for psak. But it's not limited to that. Oftentimes we'll be, consult with Shmuel, maybe so, depending on the question, certainly when it comes to literally like life and death, which is more and more of an issue today, that often requires, Rav Willig said, don't call me, that requires even broader shoulders. So it really depends on the issues, but most congregational shul type of issues and whatnot that come up, certainly as a shul being a young Israel, so I'm assuming we're still a member of good standing. Assuming so. So there actually are maybe people who realize rules and regulations within the National Council of Young Israel that you sort of have to use them in their basin as their shul. But Rav Willig has certainly been a tremendous source of support and inspiration for all of us.
Okay, this is somewhat repetitive, but it might be a little bit different. So you can defer if you want. But how would you make changes to our davening and overall image to attract younger members?
That's a very good question because it assumes we have an imaging problem. I don't know about the rest of you, but I've davened probably in every shul, at least in this neighborhood, at least once. Some literally just once, but at least once. And it's amazing how people sometimes choose to focus on, a small little difference here or there and don't notice that, 98 or 99% is really pretty much the same. Unless you're, Taimani, and then it's a whole different world. But the differences are really not all that great. Now, that doesn't mean to say that davening can't be streamlined, that, Mishaverovs can't be also streamlined, and that things can't be done to keep davening within a relative period of time. But bottom line is, if you go to most shuls, especially in this neighborhood, you're looking at a 2 to 2.25 hour davening on Shabbos on average. That's pretty much what it is across the board, give or take a few minutes here or there. We're talking Shabbos davening, not weekday. So are there things that could be done to make sure that we always keep within that reasonable time frame? Of course, there's no question that you can do things like that. Some of them have already been done. What many of us term the children's song at the end of davening. So we've compacted it a little bit. And some people are like, oh, how do you do that? How can you do that? Well, other people can do it. You can't do it over here. So, I mean, obviously how you decide where and what, has to be considered, but certainly there are things that they can be done. I think the most important thing is that you have to have, balei tefillah who make the davening, inspirational, singing songs that people can join in. There's nothing worse than when somebody gets up there and, they're essentially what we say davening for themselves, and the crowd is just, torture. And it's been known to happen across the board, because sometimes you have various reasons why, people, insist on davening at different times and whatnot. And we have to educate and help people to remember that you're the shliach tzibur and you're representative of the people, and you want to daven in such a way that, the people are involved and the people ultimately enjoy it. And that's by far the biggest thing. If you have a baal tefillah, if he sings a bit too much, but, the people are enjoying it, they're involved, no one's complaining about that. On the other hand, if you have even the greatest chazan, but concerts going on instead of davening in shul, well, when I'm going to a concert, I want to hear a concert, but if I'm in shul, I want to daven. So there definitely are ways and things to help, maximize the time in a meaningful way. But I want to address for a moment the image problem, because I think 9/10 of things is really the image. Okay, there's a reason why advertising companies spend so much time, PR, and trying to build up an image. Because even if their product is horrific, but if they manage to get the image out there and the right PR, somehow it sells. And that really comes, I think, from the people. That when people enjoy the davening and they share that with other people and invite other people to experience the same thing, you start to change the image of the place. And when you start to hear of, oh wow, did you get this guy who's davening at the shul over there, it was really good, you should come here. And the more people like that you can slowly get involved, and that's the reason why you have different shuls doing different things. Popular thing has become like from Rosh Chodesh, for example, Rosh Chodesh mentioning Shabbos Mavarchim, so they would hire a Baal Tefillah for that Shabbos, right? Make it special and let everybody know. Some people try the Karlbach style, Karlbach minyan, that speaks to some people, So there's different things that you can do to make people start talking and saying, there's a nice davening over here. And I don't think that our davening here is not a nice davening. I think that the image, sending out that message so that people, hear and people that are excited, they're excited to come or they're excited to hear at least about, the davening that's going on. Imaging, rebranding, that is the biggest part of it. Because like I said, I go to different shuls. I don't see much of a big difference. You go here, you go to Shari, you go to wherever else. It's very minimal. Oftentimes, most of the time, we're all using the same tunes. I think we're all saying the same tefillahs. We're all facing the same direction. So what's the difference? Imaging. And so that's something that we have to work on in general, is that we have to present a better image. You present a better image when people are excited about something. And the people who are attending more, those are the biggest salesmen. And that's what we have to create. We have to create an excitement that people leave the shul feeling uplifted from davening, and people can see that on their faces. Instead of running home from shul because, enough, people are hanging out a little bit longer because they're not in a rush. They're not looking to run away. They're enjoying the experience that they have. And that comes with re-imaging and rebranding and really people advertising that to the community as well.
Okay, I'm going to make an executive decision here and skip a bunch of these questions that are highly repetitive and ask this one question, then we'll open it up to the floor. This is a bit of a curveball, so strap in. What do you feel that you bring to the shul that Rabbi Brodsky and Rabbi Miller don't?
More children. So I think both Rabbi Miller and Rabbi Brodsky, first of all, I think they both talented men, and they would both be very worthy individuals for you guys to choose. And I said this is recently somebody on the board this past week. I said, if you want somebody who's going to be like 100%, at this shul all the time and doing whatever it is they feel that they can, and these guys are presenting that to you, please vote for them, hire them, go for them. I'm very happy to help out and support where I can. And, Baruch Hashem, I'm happy in life and it all moves forward. But what am I, in what sense am I different, or what do I bring that's a little bit different? I think one thing is for sure, an advantage that I have is that being that I'm in the community for 3 years already, I have a much greater sense of the reality that's here. And I'm able to sit down and be open and honest and tell you what needs to be done. Not what in theory, this is what happened over here. And in this community, I used to do X, and it's all true and wonderful. There's no question. But we're not talking about Boca. We're not talking about Hollywood. We're not talking about New Jersey. We're talking about NMB here today. And I have no illusions about what the community is. I have no illusions about what it can become. And the only question is can we work it out to move in that direction? Is there a willingness within the shul community to do the necessary things to move it forward? So that is one thing, that's one difference I think that I bring, that I'm very much aware of the situation and what really needs to be done, and I can be open and honest about it.
I'm going to open up the floor, but just a reminder, try not to get repetitive on questions that were already asked unless you're asking a more specific point or a clarification. And to the Rabbi and Rebbitzin, a reminder to restate the question for the purpose of the people on the Zoom. And Jay, you had a question earlier, or was it already answered?
No.
Okay, go ahead.
Earlier, you mentioned Bayit and Boca Raton Synagogue as examples of how other shuls are run. So I wasn't quite clear. Is your vision in Young Israel here to have multiple minyanim? No, there's already a Hashkoma minyan, but is your vision to have multiple minyanim a la the Bayit and Boca Raton Synagogue in Hollywood to attract other members?
So the question is, based on what I mentioned earlier about shuls in other communities that have multiple minyanim and multiple communities within communities. So the question is that my intention over here? So first and foremost, my intention and my vision is not to limit my intention and my vision. And that is extremely important, because once you narrow things and say, this is how it's going to be, then you've already lost, because you don't know how it's going to be, and you don't know how it should be, and you don't know what will be necessary. No one can put a stamp and say it has to absolutely be this way. Now, yes, there are some who do have, that attitude that, no matter what, this is the way it has to be, and if we fail, so be it. You're prepared to do that, then okay. It's an approach. That's not my approach. But my vision is to be as expansive as possible. If you want to have a membership and you have a diverse community, and diversity includes not only multiple levels of observance or multiple levels of minhagim, it also includes multiple levels of age. You have, the younger crowd, a really younger crowd. You have someone over here who is trying to spearhead and kol hakavod to you, Asaf, the idea of the youth minyan and the importance of the youth. And there's no question about that. To ignore it is, that's committing suicide in the future. Well, if your own kids are not going to be around, so who will be? So it's very important. So there has to be space for as much as is possible. And we have to be open to it. What that ultimately looks at, that remains to be seen, because you have to speak to the people involved and see what is necessary. You mentioned that we already have multiple minyan. Why do we have a Hashkoma minyan and what you call the main minyan? Why? Why doesn't everybody come together and right away, instantly, the seats look fuller? Wouldn't that make a lot of sense? So instead of having, I don't know, let's say you have 40 people at one minyan and 80 people at, great, now you have 120 people at both. So immediately stop the two minyanim, have everybody at one. Anybody who walks in sees a much bigger crowd. Problem solved. Is problem solved? No. There's a reason why there's a Hashkama minyan, because it speaks to people. There's a reason why there's a regular minyan. Well, there's a reason why shuls that have multiple things is because they recognize and understand that different things speak to different people. And if you have a group, and I say a group, I don't mean 9 people and they'll figure out a 10th. I mean, you have a serious group of people who say, we want a Hashkama minyan, we want a this minyan, we want that, whatever it might be. Why would we deny them? Why would we say no? Why would we say, go there? Why don't we go there? And then we're going to ask the question, why don't we have members here? We got to bring them in here. We got to give them a space here. So what exactly that looks like at the end of the day, that remains to be seen. But I certainly am very, very much open to that concept of, just like we have now, the multiple minyanim. So we used to have, even on Sunday, we had, at one point, there was 3 minyanim here in the morning. Why? Put everybody together in one, and they had one huge minyan. Why have 3 minyan of 25 and you can have one of 75? There's a reason for it. There's a reason why people like the minyans that they like. Sometimes a little bit faster. Sometimes people like to learn after they daven early on Shabbos. Whatever it is, if we can make a space for it, why wouldn't?
So lots of
You, if I understand you correctly, you said that you would not change the minhagim of the shul.
No, I said that we'd be
restate it.
very, very careful with messing with any of the minhagim.
Okay, so my question is, we no longer do an Rosh on Shabbos. What is the reasoning and why did you make that decision?
So first and foremost, not every decision of things that happened here over the last little time would make them. That doesn't necessarily mean I oppose it, but that's first of all. As an interim rabbi, one of the things I've tried very much to do, besides upkeeping whatever was, is certain things that certain people felt might be a good idea. I'm not necessarily. I don't feel like as an interim to be the one to impose a finality either way. So that's first. But we have to define also, which is very important, what are minhagim of a shul and what are things that we do. As an example of that, you have some shuls that when it comes to Kriyas Torah, so they bring the Torah around the whole shul, sometimes multiple times, who knows, whatever it is, right? So let's avoid for a moment the halachic potential issues with that for a second. So now some people say, you know what, during that time period, it takes 5 extra minutes and people start talking, it just disturbs the whole environment, whatever, maybe we should shorten it. So it's a minhag of the shul that we walk around. Is that a minhag of the shul? I mean, something that we do, no question, or it was being done, but does that have the status and force of a minhag? So you have to define those two things, because not everything that a shul does is necessarily entrenched within the idea of a minhag, like it's a yarad vayavar, you can't touch this is a serious business, versus something that a shul did at a various time for whatever reason that maybe there's a reason to do a little bit differently now. So as I'm sure you're aware, if you go to other shuls, the idea of having these certain things that are said at the end of davening, and more specifically having kids to go up and do them. So a lot of it is based on, the custom, if you will, but the idea, which, it's not a bad one. It was a nice thing, certainly this time. I used to get up there as a youngster, singing Kanu and Onyx Miros and whatever. The parents liked it, and the people liked it. The kids get involved. They come and they sing at the end. It's a beautiful thing. But that was something that was really popular when I was growing up, and people appreciated it and people enjoyed it, and it's wonderful. And what you notice in some places, unfortunately, is now Nebuch, the poor kid, is up there and they're singing and they're so proud. And sometimes their own father is ignoring them and talking and doing whatever else. So there's a disconnect that has taken place over time with, why this originally started and why they put them up there to get the kids involved in davening, to show them that they have a place in the shul, and to what unfortunately developed in a lot of places where it's like, this is the children's song section, and the rest of us are already halfway out the door. And the message to the kids is very clear. You don't count, and whatever you're singing certainly doesn't count. And when people say that, maybe that's not a message we should send anymore, so that's not changing a minute. That is understanding the situation that has developed. And I'm not saying that's why it's happening over here. It very well could be that some people are like, this is taking too long. That's it. But sometimes you make changes to different things that are shul done because communities do things that work at various times because they're meaningful and they have their place. And if it loses that, sometimes you have to rethink it. That doesn't mean you're changing a minhag, you're changing something that the shul used to do, but there may be a very valid reason why it's not speaking to people, or now there's something else that can work even better. And so every issue has to be looked at through that lens. Are we talking about a halacha? Are we talking about a minhag that is something that is sacrosanct, that for example, you want to go ahead and suddenly make a Sephardi, the nusach hatfilah, we're going to change it. So unless the whole shul change over to Sephardi, which, but other than that, like, you're just going to interchange the nusach hatfilah just like that, that's not something that you can just toy with and mess with. I mean, one of the things that I noticed that happens sometimes over here, and I'm not sure where it comes from, I think Moshe also mentioned it to me, sometimes the person who says Kaddish at the end of Kriyas Torah is not the one who learned. They gave it to a mourner. No clue where that came from. I mean, I know that Sephardim didn't tend to do that, but in terms of an Ashkenazi shul, never heard of it, never seen it, right? So those are areas where, what do you mean? You just can't change. You just can't make those changes because that's a specific halachic issue or minhag issue based on the Torah. But practices that take place within a shul that a shul develops for various reasons due to circumstances and people and time, if it no longer speaks to people or people want to make certain changes to that, there's nothing wrong with that. Same thing with the Zman of the Tefillah, 9 o'clock at davening. Okay, now we want to make it 8:30. Why? Most of the people prefer to go 8:30 to 10:30. The minhag of the shul is 9 o'clock. It's not a minhag. That's what the shul did. It was a practice. If there's a reason that enough people say we think we should change it for X and Y, okay, that can be doable. So it depends what, we have to understand very well what a minhag is, what halacha is, and what a shul practice is in terms of what can. And even a shul practice doesn't mean because there's a practice to throw it out. No, if it's something that's working and going well, why would you change it? But sometimes you do have to change things up because times change, people change, needs change, and you have to be able to, sometimes go with the flow of it.
Many of us here in the room are longtime members that remember the days when we had the youngest row choir up there on the bima. It was good, 15, 20 kids on an average Shabbos, right? Up there. Okay, Friday.
Rabbi, thank you for being here for all of this time, and certainly Rabbi representing for today. Something that resonated with me is when I davened in West Rogers Park, Chicago, I previously davened in a shul like this called KINS, and also I split my time with Al Hasidim. Now, obviously, very different minhagim and davening, etc. You talked a lot about the differences in where the shul might be going and where we as a community might want the shul to go, and your willingness to not only drive that train but listen. What would you like to see as the process? Because everyone's asking you the questions today and looking for an answer today, and you've spoken about a communal decision of how things are done, or how those decisions are made, what direction we take. How would you suggest that process will come about, where it's a discussion about direction?
So the first thing that has to happen. Thank you for the reminder. So the question is basically, what is the process that I would like to see, or I guess how do we begin to, start to implement some of these ideas and start to move things in any direction for that matter. So I think the first thing in the process is that there has to be engagement, certainly between the rabbi and the shul, but most importantly, whether it be a committee or the board appointed committee, however that works, that really has to have a dedicated but specific amount of time where they have to engage with the membership very intensely and have these discussions about where we want to move the shul forward. Because we have to know what is the expectations of people, what are the wants of people, what are their, if such and such had to happen, that would be the end of the world for me. On the other hand, other things I can live with, I'm more open to work. So you have to have that engagement with people, and for the very least, it's respect and hakaras hatov for the membership that is here. Not to just impose something from the outside, but to have that discussion about where that's going to work. So any future rabbi, along with whether it be a board or a committee, has to be committed to getting that started done. And you need, whether it be a 3-month period, whatever it might be, to sit down and engage the entire membership, ideally, to figure out where are people holding, and to also have a communication of where they see the shul and what they're prepared to see happen. And then we have to begin to plan a process of baby steps, really, of going, but constantly moving and pushing forward and figuring out those things that are going to allow us to make the shul as open and welcoming as possible to others. So that's on our side. Simultaneously to that is that message has to now be communicated out there so that people realize, they understand, and they know what's going on over here. They know that what Young Israel is trying to do, the role that we're trying to fulfill in the community. We have to identify the needs that are out there, because no one institution is ever going to fulfill everyone's needs. And you got to figure out, well, if there's a specific area that we can go ahead and target and figure out, then let's do it. And so that message, while it's being built over here, simultaneously has to be sent and spread within the community. Again, the PR aspect, so that people will hear about that changes are happening over here, and space is being made over here, and we welcome and want others to come and join us in this venture.
What's wrong?
First, number one, do you think a survey of the members of how to improve the shul is useful? Two, if we have pure outreach for people, do you think that would help? Three, if we have more community events on a regular basis, like every week, four, if we specialize in, I should say specialize, we try to get as many members, we try to get other people to say, oh, we're doing this here, maybe you should join us. Thank you.
He got a 4 for it, not a 2 for it.
First of all, you're hired. All right, let's go with one and we'll repeat each one. So your first question was survey. So as good as a survey is a piece of paper, and what people say on a survey may mean one thing, may mean another thing. The best thing is the engagement directly. So I would say you can start off with a survey, but it needs to follow up directly with people, sitting down, meeting them in their homes or your home, wherever it is. COVID friendly, obviously still. So a survey can only take you so far. It needs to be engagement, direct. Question number 2 was?
I mean, you which get more people to come to school, it's a more positive learning experience for them.
Yes, so when you talk about Kiruv, so this again goes to an understanding of the community and who you're trying to bring to your shul. So one of the positive things, and again, I haven't met every single Jew in NMB, but Baruch Hashem, it's really, really very hard to find over here Jews who are totally disengaged within our community. I'm not saying there aren't any, there might be some, but the vast majority are very much engaged Jews. So Kiruv in the traditional sense of what that word means, i.e. outreach to people who have no involvement and whatnot, that is obviously not something that is going to be huge within this community because you just don't have that. But that may speak to the greater Miami-Dade area. But if you want to try to focus on that, that is a whole different element of programming and engagement that is not going to address the daily and weekly needs of the shul, because the amount of time, effort, and money to get someone who is not Shomer Shabbos to be Shomer Shabbos, move into your neighborhood and take it all on and whatnot, while it's an important investment and it is being done to some degree, but for a shul, a community shul like this, to undertake that within the greater Miami-Dade County, certainly would not produce the results in an effective time that the shul needs over here. So while Kiruv is important, should you happen, if there's a neighbor out there that's not so religious or religious at all, engage them. Absolutely, why not? If they're there anyways. I mean, that's probably a responsibility we always have to engage the neighbors like that. But certainly the direction of NMB is that it's a very strong, Orthodox community. And so the outreach has to not be in terms of trying to make people from well beyond that, but to make a space for those people within our shul so that they'll want to be here. Question number 3.
Different classes on a regular basis, different levels of computer,
Right. So in terms of classes and in terms of programs, so again, depending on who you're going for and what the outreach is and who you're trying to attract, so sometimes overkill is too much. So you have to know who you're engaging. If you're looking at trying to attract people who are already into the idea of learning, for example, every single day, then of course you want to provide an environment for those people that they feel comfortable that they can come over here and they have a makom to learn every single day. Absolutely. If you're talking about programming in general, like we're having, a bowling party, the end of year youth celebration, wonderful, lovely idea. I highly doubt out of the thousands of from kids in our neighborhood that they're all going to show up at the bowling party. Again, because nothing wrong with the bowling party, but it doesn't speak to the needs of many people who have kids that they have to do this. Again, not that we shouldn't do it, but that's not going to speak to the majority of the community. And so when it comes to programs, to have a program for the sake of a program, that's the worst thing you could do. Never have a program that's on paper. And in reality, there's nothing really going on because nobody shows up and nobody's really interested. But on paper, it looks nice. If you have a program, it should be thoughtful, it should be meaningful, it should be engaging, it should be purposeful. And most important, it should accomplish whatever you're trying to accomplish. And so before you plan out an array of programs, the first thing you have to ask yourself is, what am I trying to accomplish with any of this? Because otherwise, the volunteers that you're going to require to run it are going to get burnt out really quick. And the money that you fundraise to support it is going to dry up. You're going to say, what am I doing this for? What am I supporting? 3 people showed up to whatever it is. Like, what am I doing? What are you guys doing? So in order to make sure that you keep both of those things on track, the planning and the purpose of it is much more important than simply saying, oh, look, we have 300 different things going on, when you really don't. And question 4.
Having regular events, for example, chess club or a speaker every week, or having events going somewhere.
So again, so it's the same idea. When you have a constituency, when you have a purpose that you have people who like to play chess, they enjoy it. You start a chess club, it's popular, people come, wonderful, great. But to have a chess club because I want to say, look, I have a program, but nobody actually shows up to it, well then, what was the point? So any program that we do, any event that we do, it has to be with the planning and understanding, who are we trying to engage in this, what are we trying to accomplish with it, and ultimately after the program, the follow-up is, was it successful or not? When it comes to anything, sometimes too much is too much. So if you have, oh, let's have a speaker every week, let's have this every week, let's have an oneg every week, let's have anything every week, at a certain point, either people start taking it for granted or they get tired of it. So you have to judge the people at the program that you're offering. If you have a group of people, for example, and you probably would for this, that would very much enjoy, especially having, let's say, a free weekly barbecue followed by, and learning. And they're going to have this wonderful smorgasbord, and it's going to attract people to come. They're going to have a nice time or whatever. And they're very happy to have this enjoyable event on a weekly basis. Great, wonderful. But if you're doing an event that's really taxing on people, like for example, we had an oneg this past Friday night. An oneg, especially in the summertime, when it's very late, it's very difficult, not so easy. Oh, we're gonna have an oneg every single week. Well, you could say that you're doing that, but are people actually gonna end up showing up every single week? So you have to judge every program on its merits, and most importantly on your plans, what we're trying to accomplish. But there's certainly nothing wrong that anything that you have a group of people who want to do it and are prepared to invest in it, why not? I think that's pretty much how every single Kiddush club across the country took off. Group of dedicated people.
So we're at about an hour here, and we've already lost a few people in person, but I just want to say, if you have any other questions, we definitely want them, but make sure they're significantly different and something that haven't been covered. Go ahead.
This show had a vibrant sisterhood. And 80 women, maybe more or less, in the sisterhood. It attracted people to come to the shore. They made Kumatashin at one time. They had a circle. They had a thrift shop. And it was a very, very successful system of becoming the auxiliary, whatever you want to call it. And which will then appear out completely. And makes people down because if they have a system and it attracted women, so people come into the community, they may join the shul because of the system or this and that. It's something to think about, and it's very successful. Another system, I think the shul would be much better off if they had some kind of program where they could reinstate women to have the power of the system. The shul is lacking.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Suggestion, that's all.
Any other questions for the Rabbi or Rabbiton? All right, so just want to call this meeting in. Like I said, we're at about an hour here. Certainly, if you have any other follow-up questions you want to ask the Rabbi or Rabbiton personally, I'm sure you're sticking around. You live here, so.
There we go.
So if anyone has anything, I want to thank the Rabbi and Rabbiton for their time this morning, and have a great day.
Off to you.